everyone, welcome back to A+ Maths. Today I'd like to do factorising. We will do a revision of the entire topic, which is mainly 4 different types of questions. I find that a lot of people get very confused because they think that there are a lot of different ways to do the questions, when really there's only 4. Let's go through those 4 and then we can start doing some examples. When you need to factorise a question, you need to think about our flowchart. But our first point is take out a common factor. After you have taken out a common factor, you then need to look at what you're left with in the expression and see whether or not you have 2, 3 or 4 terms. You will then decide what you need to do next. If after having looked at your expression, you think you have 2 terms, then you don't have very many options. You've already taken out the common factor. Your next step will be to do the difference of 2 squares. And our rule for the difference of 2 squares is x squared minus y squared equals x minus y, x plus y. We'll go through how to do each of them individually later. At the moment we're just going through the flowchart, so bear with me, even if you're not 100% sure what I might mean. If you look at your expression and there is 3 terms, there are 2 options for 3 terms, and we need to make a decision on which one we're going to do. It will either be a monic trinomial, that's what it's called when there's 3 terms, a trinomial, or a non-monic trinomial. Don't be scared of the words. We'll go through each of these individually in a little while, but a monic trinomial has a 1x squared, and a non-monic trinomial has any number in front of the x squared that is not a 1. So 2x squared or 4x squared or 6x squared, etc. And our lucky last is if your factorising expression has 4 terms, then you would need to factorise it in pairs. And like I said, now that we know what our flowchart is, we should be able to do every question. If you're doing the factorising exercises at school, I would imagine that you already know how to take out a common factor, so I'll go through this section pretty quickly. 2x plus 4. We need to look at what's in the 2x and what's in the 4 that goes into both. 2 goes into both, so we're going to take out a 2, and then we write down what's left. 2 times what gives you 2x? 2 times x gives you 2x. And 2 times plus 2 gives us 4. T squared minus ts. So we need to look at each one. There's only 2 terms, but we know we need to take out a common factor first. That's the first thing on our flowchart. We can see that there's a t in common, so we take out a t, and then we need to write down what's left. T times what gives t squared? T times t. And then t times what gives me minus ts? T times minus s should give me minus ts. And don't forget, you can always expand it really quickly in your head. You should be able to expand it pretty quickly in your head and see that t times t is t squared and t times minus s is minus ts. They can't really make them too much more complicated. It's only if they put numbers and letters together. I look at the numbers first and I see what's the highest common factor, what number goes into both of those. I could pick 3, but 3 is not the biggest, so we don't really want to pick the number that's not the biggest. So we choose 9. I know there's an x in both, only 1, and there's a y in both. And then I write down what's left. 9xy times what will give me 54x squared y? Well, 6 9s are 54, x times x gives me x squared. Then I go to the next one. 9xy times what will give me minus 9xy, and that will be minus 1. I think that's enough for common factors. Let's move on to 2 terms is the next thing on our flowchart. Then we know that it's going to be a difference of 2 squares. I think you're lucky with the difference of 2 squares because there's a rule. It can be tricky sometimes to see the rule, and these questions can get quite difficult. And I'll show you both the easier ones and the difficult ones, and you need to figure out what level you're at and how far you need to go. That's our basic rule. X squared minus y squared equals x minus y, x plus y. And be aware that it doesn't matter if you write x minus y, x plus y, or x plus y, x minus y, they are the same thing. Let's do a couple of examples together. If we start with a basic question like x squared minus 9, it's not written in the right form. So the first thing we want to do is to write it as x squared minus 3 squared. Then we can see exactly what each x and y would be, x and 3. And we just need to replace them into the same places as they would be in the formula. So it's x take away 3 and x plus 3. So this question has two squared numbers, lucky for us. So we're going to write it in the form something squared minus something squared so that we can see how to use the formula. 64 is 8 squared minus 9 is 3 squared and the y is squared, and we're going to write it like that because that's the same form as the formula. And now that it's in the right form, it becomes quite simple. 8 minus 3y and 8 plus 3y. If we bring in fractions, it can look like this. But we know our rule. X squared minus y squared equals x minus y, x plus y. Let's write it in the right form. That's going to be x over 3 squared is 9 minus y squared. And now because it's in the right form, we should be able to write down the answer pretty easily. It's going to be the first bracket minus y and the first bracket plus y. Easy enough? It's always a little bit tricky when there's a 1 because we forget that 1 squared is 1. If we put the squared there, isn't this practically in the right form already? 8y all squared minus 1 squared. And again, we just use our rule. 8y minus 1, 8y plus 1. Not so bad. How about we start to make them a little bit more complicated? If we have a question like this, there are definitely two terms. One here, that's one term because it's in brackets, and this is another term, 4. So we know that this question has to be a difference of 2 squares to factorise. But what makes it tricky is that there are 2 terms inside this first term. So if we remember our rule, x squared minus y squared equals x minus y, x plus y. Try to think of it as being the first bit minus the second bit. The first part goes in the first part of the bracket and the y goes in the second part of the bracket. The first thing I need to do is to write it in the right form so that I don't get confused. X plus 1 all squared minus 2 squared. Now I'm going to colour code everything so that I can see where everything goes when I factorise it. My first term is x plus 1 and my second term is 2. And now I can factorise it. Let's put our brackets. We know that the first part needs to go here. That's x plus 1 and x plus 1 needs to go there. And our second part needs to go over here. And our rule tells us one of them is minus and one of them is plus. And I'm pretty much done, except that I can add like terms inside the brackets, which of course we should always do. X, 1 minus 2 is minus 1, and 1 plus 2 is 3. That question looks a little bit daunting, but let's have a go at another one and see how it goes. The second one should be easier because we've already done one and we know what to do. Same type of question. Why don't you have a go at it first before I do it? All right, let's see how you went. Hopefully you used different colours and you tried to colour code it like I did in the last example. This is our first section and this is our second section. It's already in the right form for us, so we're lucky. And now we just need to rewrite it. I like to put my brackets. I know the first term comes first. And the second one, minus and a plus. And there are no like terms, so I'm lucky I'm finished. I'll show you one that's a little bit more tricky. It looks the same, but it's a tad little trickier because we're going to have our two terms in the second part. They look the same, but actually the second question, number 7, is a lot more difficult than the first question. I'm going to do the same thing. The first one I'll do in orange, and the second one I'm going to do in green. And then I'm going to write them out. Pull my brackets, because I know it's the difference of two squares. The first bit goes first, the second bit goes second. I put a minus and I put a plus. Now, of course, something's wrong. If you can spot what's wrong, that's really good. If not, let's just think about it for a minute. I've got y minus all of that together. That should be together. But my problem is that I have this minus here. And because I have not put brackets around my a minus 3, the minus will not expand the minus 3. And that is where we've gone wrong. If you ever have brackets with one of the terms, it's always a good idea to actually put brackets around it while you're doing the question. Now, I deliberately didn't put brackets here and here because I didn't want to confuse you and then have to expand them later. But when you're doing difference of two squares, if you're in a situation where one of the terms that you're going to write down has more than one term in it, it's a good idea to always put it in brackets. And now I would need to expand these brackets to actually get the final correct answer. And when you expand this bracket, don't forget that there's a 1 here when I expand. So I get minus 1 times a is minus a, minus 1 times minus 3 is plus 3. And it's that plus 3 that would be missing if you didn't put the brackets in the first place. So my advice is to always put the brackets in, even if you don't have the minus, because then you don't have to worry about whether or not you needed it or not. It's just always going to be there. Thanks for watching again. Don't forget to subscribe below so that you get notifications when my new videos come out. And remember, if you want to ask me any questions, either put a comment underneath the video or shoot me through an email at heidipostle@gmail.com.